Hello and welcome to another virtual learning webinar. My name is Aaron Hathaway. Happy to be here with you. Today we're going to talk about Anuew and its use in warm season turf. We're going to talk about Bermuda grass in particular, as it's had the bulk of the research done on it, but we will touch on a few other warm season species as well. So what are PGRs? Plant growth regulators are just that. They're going to regulate growth, and they're going to do this by, for the most part, most of the PGRs we're using in turf grass are going to inhibit gibberellic acid production in the plant. And Anuew is a Class A PGR and very similar to Primo Max in that way versus those Class B PGRs. The difference between Class A and Class B PGRs is pretty simple. So Class A is going to inhibit that GA or gibberellic acid late in this biosynthesis pathway, as you can see in the bottom left there. And the Class B are going to inhibit GA much earlier in that pathway. And because of this, Class B PGRs are a little more heavy-handed. They're going to provide a little more growth suppression. They can cause a little more injury. Trimmett and Cutlass, for instance, aren't labeled for Bermuda grass putting greens because of this. So you're getting fewer of those precursors, those GA precursors that lead to other pathways. So they can cause more growth suppression because of that. Class A PGRs, because you are getting some of those precursors that you aren't with the Class B, they can provide, on the other hand, some health benefits even. And that's always the goal with these PGRs. If you look at the bottom right, you see all the possible benefits that you can get from making these PGR applications. And it's really about reducing that growth so that you can partition the energy that would be normally put into that growth that we're mowing off and throwing away. That we don't necessarily need. Now we need some growth, obviously, but we don't need all of it. So if you can stop that growth, you partition that energy elsewhere, you cause the plant to use it maybe for roots, maybe for tillering, many other things, then you can save on things like water. Maybe that plant's going to use less water. Maybe it's going to be healthier when you go into a stress period and it's more able to survive during that stress period. Fewer clippings, obviously, perhaps increased green speed, things like that. So Anuew is a foliarly absorbed PGR like Primo. The Class B PGRs, both of the ones that I mentioned, Trimmett and Cutlass, you would water those in. Those are taken up by the plant by the roots. The Class A PGRs, and Anuew is included in this, are taken up by the foliage. So there's no need to water it in, and it's going to be rain fast within 4 hours. It can be a good idea to add a non-ionic surfactant when you're applying Anuew, just so you increase how even that coverage is over these many plants, especially on a putting green. Because it's taken up by the foliage, you want even coverage. You want a pretty good coverage of all of those plants. You don't want to miss any of them. Also, if your water carrier is hard, perhaps if there's calcium in that water, make sure to add a pound of ammonium sulfate for every pound of Anuew that you put into your spray tank. So what benefits does Anuew give to those who are going to use it in Bermuda grass particularly? And we're going to compare Anuew to Primo, because Primo is often used by turf managers right now in Bermuda grass. We're going to talk mostly about putting greens, but we'll touch on fairways. We'll touch on some other species as well. But compared to Trinexpec ethyl, Anuew is going to give you equal intensity, both on fairways of Bermuda grass and putting greens. But the biggest difference that you're going to see is that it's going to give you a shorter duration of effect, and we'll talk about why that might be good for turf managers. You're going to have improved appearance or quality of the turf when you're making these Anuew applications. It's a really great choice when you're dealing with ultra dwarf Bermuda grass greens with off types in it, because you're going to get more even regulation, and we're going to talk about some of the specifics of that. And then a great choice for these other species as well that we'll talk about. So Anuew versus Primo Max, there was a recent publication in Crop Science. This was Kreuzer and Company, Growing Degree Day Models for PGR Applications on Ultra Dwarf Hybrid Bermuda Grass Putting Greens. And so you see Anuew on the left, which is prohexyl calcium, and Trinexpec ethyl, which is Primo on the right. and you see the rates that they were applied on in this particular study. So peak suppression, gross suppression from Anuew is between 50 and 55% of the untreated plots. Peak suppression of Primo is between 50 and 60. So very similar in the amount of gross suppression that they're going to provide. And then after this, you're going to see a few differences. The time it takes for Anuew to reach that peak suppression is a little bit faster, about half as long as it takes Primo to reach that peak suppression. And so 95 growing degree days with that base 10 for Anuew and 170 growing degree days for Primo. This could be important if you have a very specific timeline. Maybe you have a tournament coming up and you have a very specific window to make an application and you want peak suppression to be reached at a particular time. So there could be certain instances where you would make a choice of which PGR to apply based on this information. And then reapplication intervals is obviously an important thing because the whole goal is to stay within this stay in this regulation. You never want these grasses to really come out of regulation. You want to regulate that growth all the time so that you're not baling hay, so that you're not collecting all these clippings, so that you are getting the benefits, the health benefits of these plant growth regulators as much as possible throughout the entire season. So the reapplication interval for Anuew on the left is 120 growing degree days with that base of 10, and with Primo, it's longer. They found that it was about 216. They'll follow pretty much a 200 growing degree day model with that base 10 with Primo. And so you see the average days, that's based on like a Florida climate in the middle of the summer. So it's more pretty much weekly. And then for Anuew, it's pretty much a weekly application during that time period. And for Primo, you're kind of between maybe 10 and 14 days between that period of time. And this is why the fact that it doesn't last as long on these ultra dwarf Bermuda grass putting greens can be an advantage, because superintendents are often going out every 7 days, every week, and making these applications. Anuew is very well suited for that timeline, for making these weekly applications so that you don't have stacking of these PGRs and over application, and maybe you're reducing of that growth too much over time and causing some injury to your putting greens. So Anuew is very well suited for those weekly applications. For both of these products, as you increase that rate, you do see an increased response. And one thing I'll mention is that Anuew is a little bit softer because of this difference in reapplication interval on warm season grasses. It's a little bit softer on Bermuda grass. And it's funny, Anuew will give you a longer period of plant growth effect on cool season grasses than Primo, and on warm season grasses, it's flipped. So this is just kind of a picture. This was Eric Razor's research. He was at Tennessee. I actually mimicked this research. It was fairly similar on cool season grasses on creeping bent grass in the north when I was at Michigan State. But this was, we were looking at putting green speeds. Could we increase green speeds by using PGRs? And this PGR that we were using was exclusively Primo Max. And so you see the rates, 0 fluid ounces per acre. That's obviously the untreated control, 1, 3, and 9. These applications, and there's 2 different sites here, these applications were made weekly. And you can see some of the plots where you're starting to get some decline of these Mini Verde Bermuda grass putting greens. Those weekly applications, especially as those rates get up, you start to get the stacking effect where you have the PGR working in the plant, inhibiting that GA, and then you make another application before all that PGR is gone or before it's time, and you start to stack up the effect of this PGR, and you can run into a decline of your putting greens. So this is something that can happen with those weekly applications of Primo. And again, as I mentioned, Anuew is much more suited for that weekly timeline. So PGR applications and intervals on Bermuda grass, kind of the difference between rates of these different PGRs on greens and fairways, and then an overview of those different intervals as they've been found throughout the last few years through research. Remember that this is a growing degree day model based on growing degree days in Celsius. So you're finding the average temperature in Celsius and you're accumulating those growing degree days. But for warm season grasses, every time you get an average, you're subtracting that base of 10 degrees. So you're adding them up each day until you hit your window, then you're reapplying, but make sure you're subtracting that base of 10 degrees every single day when you get your average temperature in Celsius. So this is what it looks like. This is real data from 2018 that I just pulled from a weather service. This is in Orlando, Florida, and this is assuming that we made a first application of Anuew on May 1st, and we're following that growing degree day reapplication interval of 120 growing degree days with a base of 10. And so you can see if I follow that, if I reapply every 120 growing degree days, my average reapplication interval in days, in actual days, calendar days, is 7. And you can see from May 1st all the way till pretty much the end of October, I'm pretty consistently reapplying every 7 days. So if this is something that you want to do as a superintendent, want to get out there every week and make these applications, maybe you're applying other things and you just want to stay on the schedule. Like I said, Anuew is very well suited for this type of schedule on ultra dwarf Bermuda grass putting greens. Just to show some of the regulation on fairways, these are all Anuew applications, and these are rates from 7 ounces on the left all the way to 35 ounces on the right. And you can see the growth reduction versus, this is reduction of growth relative to the untreated plots. So you can see as you move up in rate, you get a very consistent climb in the amount of reduction versus the untreated that you're going to get. And this is, again, on a fairway. Very similar on zoysia grass, except that that stepwise increase in growth reduction is a little bit lesser. But again, 7 ounces all the way up to 35, and you can slowly increase the amount of growth reduction you're going to get on a zoysia grass fairway. And then color. This visual color is something that's very striking. We see it all the time, and you can see in this picture, we have Primo on the far left. We have a control plot that's got good color. The Anuew in the middle has very good color. Primo again, where we've lost some of that dark green color, and then the control. So Anuew is a very good product in that it's going to keep that dark green color on these Bermuda grass putting greens. This is a Mini Verde putting green. This is Quail Hollow. This was from 2015. And the rates here were Anuew at 8 ounces per acre, and the Primo rate was 3 fluid ounces per acre. Just another picture kind of showing these two treatments side by side. Anuew on top and Primo on the bottom. You get a little better color from that Anuew. Actually, a lot better color. It's pretty striking. And then I wanted to mention how Anuew can help if you're having trouble with collar decline. And collar decline is interesting because taller turf grass, it doesn't really matter what species it is, taller turf grass has less growth potential than the shorter turf grass. So on a putting green that you're mowing at 1/8 of an inch or lower, it has a very high growth potential, and relative to the collar that you might run into, it's got a much higher growth potential than the collar. And so if you're spraying that same rate on your putting green, maybe every week when your collars need to be sprayed much less, or your aprons need to be sprayed much less, you're going to regulate the growth of the collar or the apron much more than it needs to be. And then you can start to get decline on these collars, and then you start to mix that in with maybe rolling, or you're using walk behind mowers and you're turning around on your collars. It can just exacerbate that problem. And so this is what we can see when we're making these applications. Because Anuew is a little bit softer on these turf grasses, if you have Bermuda grass collars or aprons or whatever the case may be, Anuew is going to be a little bit softer on them. So choosing that PGR is going to help eliminate this problem to some extent. We often see this problem in conjunction with rolling or using walk behind mowers, and so we start to see people actually not go onto the collars to turn around with their rollers or with their walk behind mowers, just to reduce some of the stress that they might be adding to the collars. And so we see people even using turning pads. We've seen superintendents do things like wash the PGR application off of the collars very soon after the application. So because it's taken up by foliage, if you can wash it off that foliage, then you don't get the uptake of the product by that higher height turf grass. And then talking about off-type Bermuda grasses, when you're dealing with these ultra dwarf Bermuda grass greens, we've been seeing more and more of these off types becoming a part of them. And it's difficult because the PGRs can differentially affect the growth of the off types versus the growth of whatever ultra dwarf Bermuda grass variety you have in your putting green. So it becomes very difficult to manage them. And so adding Anuew to the tank mix, we've seen, and there's been research done. Jim Brosnan at Tennessee and Eric Razor, when he was at Tennessee, they were both doing research where they would tank mix Anuew and Primo versus applying one of them on their own. And you can see Primo on its own at 3 ounces per acre on the left, and then a tank mix of 4 ounces per acre of Anuew and 1 ounce per acre of Primo help to kind of mask those off types within this putting green. And it's all about regulating them more evenly so that you're not getting one that's growing differently from the other. And with the color, the increased dark color that you're going to get from Anuew, you can help to mask it as well. So Anuew has been a really nice tank mix partner for a lesser amount of Primo than people would normally be using. This 4-in-1, or we've seen 6-in-1, or 6 ounces of Anuew and 2 ounces of Primo. But the goal is really to stay below 3 ounces of Primo. At least that's what the research found that the folks were doing at Tennessee. So just to sum some of this up, for Bermuda grass in particular, we saw equal regulation between Anuew and Primo, but that reduced duration was the big difference between these two products on Bermuda grass putting greens in particular. And that reduced duration can help because the potential for stacking, for getting too much plant growth regulation on these putting greens goes down when you're using Anuew, because it becomes a little bit of a softer product because it's not lasting quite as long as the plant. And if you want to make those applications every 7 days, these weekly applications, Anuew is the perfect product for this type of timing, to reapply it every 7 days. And again, less potential for decline in Bermuda grass collars because it's a little softer, because it's not going to last as long in those plants either, less potential for decline. Improved turf color, which we see very consistently. And then last but not least is that masking of off types in ultra dwarf Bermuda grass greens. And again, Jim Brosnan at Tennessee has been doing a lot of this research and has found that this 6 ounce rate of Anuew plus 1 ounce of Primo has been a really nice application to kind of mask the effects of those off types in there, both because we get better and more even regulation of the off types in whatever variety is in there, and we get better color to mask them. Another key is that you don't want to apply them every single week. If you do have these off types, he's found that you want to apply more like 220 or 300 growing degree days with that base 10. And as we keep moving forward with Anuew, we'll keep looking at it in all these other species as well. And so this is kind of a summary of all the different species that we have looked at or other people have looked at. And we have very good information, a lot of information on some species like bent grass and Bermuda grass, where we have pretty good information, but we are building kind of a library of different growth reduction intensities. So percent reduction, as you can see, on greens and fairways, and then the duration of those reductions on greens and fairways as well is very differential. So as we kind of move through these different species, we'll keep adding to this, and we'll find out how these products can be used differentially, and how their different benefits, or how we can show the advantages of these different products differentially. So that's it. Thanks for listening. If you have any question, as always, you can email me. My email address is right there. You can look up your local Nufarm sales rep and ask any questions of him or her. Till next time.